The metallic scrape of steel against carbon echoed through the armory like a prayer whispered in an empty cathedral. Recruit Katelyn Romano moved the cleaning rod with surgical precision, each stroke calculated to perfection, her calloused fingertips reading the rifle's condition like braille. What appeared to be a nervous trainee obsessing over her weapon was actually something far more dangerous. A predator in sheep's clothing, maintaining an instrument of war with the reverence of someone who understood its true purpose. The other recruits saw routine maintenance. They had no idea they were watching a master craftsman at work. The fluorescent lights of Fort Meridian's main armory cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor, illuminating rows of workbenches where dozens of fresh-faced recruits struggled with their first real rifle cleaning. The air hung thick with the sharp scent of gun oil and the metallic tang of freshly machined steel. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly under a merciless sun. But inside this sterile military sanctuary, the temperature was controlled, the lighting perfect, everything designed for precision work. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Katie sat alone at the far end of bench 7. Her M4A1 carbine completely field-stripped before her like the components of a complex puzzle only she could solve. While other recruits fumbled with unfamiliar parts, consulting manuals and asking for help, she moved through the disassembly and cleaning process with an almost meditative rhythm. Her movements were economical, purposeful, no wasted motion, no uncertainty. Each component received exactly the attention it required. The bolt carrier group gleaming under her careful ministrations, the barrel extension spotless, the charging handle cycling with mechanical perfection. The other members of Charlie Company kept their distance, though none could articulate exactly why. There was something about Romano that made them uneasy, not fear exactly, but a subtle recognition that she didn't quite fit the mold of a typical recruit. She was older than most, maybe 28 or 29, though her personnel file listed her age as 24. She carried herself differently too, with a quiet confidence that seemed out of place among the nervous energy and desperate to impress attitudes of fresh trainees. Staff Sergeant Rex Bulldog Morrison prowled the armory floor like a caged predator, his massive frame casting intimidating shadows as he inspected each recruit's work. Morrison was old-school military, a man who believed that respect was earned through volume and intimidation. His scarred hands and weathered face told stories of 3 combat deployments and 15 years of breaking in soft civilians who thought they could become soldiers. He ruled Charlie Company with an iron fist and a vocabulary that would make a sailor blush. "What we got here, Romano?" Morrison's voice boomed across the armory as he approached her workstation, his boots striking the concrete with deliberate authority. "Still playing with your little toy soldier gun?" Katie didn't look up from her work. She was using a bore brush with the same gentle precision a surgeon might use for delicate tissue, her focus absolute. "Cleaning my weapon, Staff Sergeant," she replied in a voice that was neither submissive nor challenging, simply factual. Morrison leaned over her shoulder, his breath hot against her neck. "Cleaning it like it's some kind of sacred relic. This ain't a museum, Romano. It's a tool. A simple tool for simple people." He gestured toward the other recruits, several of whom had stopped their own work to watch the confrontation. "Look around you. See how Thompson over there is done already? See how Martinez finished 10 minutes ago? But here you are, still polishing away like you're preparing for some white glove inspection that ain't never coming." The truth was more complex than Morrison could possibly understand. Katie wasn't cleaning her rifle because she was slow or obsessive or trying to impress anyone. She was cleaning it because the ritual centered her, because the familiar weight of the components in her hands kept certain memories at bay, because maintaining perfect weapons had once been a matter of life and death in places where failure meant watching good people die. But Morrison saw only what he expected to see. Another soft recruit who needed to be broken down and rebuilt. "You know what your problem is, Romano?" Morrison continued, his voice carrying across the armory for everyone to hear. "You think too much. You analyze everything to death. In the real world, when bullets start flying, you don't get time to make everything perfect. You get maybe 3 seconds to point and shoot before someone puts a hole in your head." Katie's hands never stopped moving, never trembled, never showed the slightest reaction to his words. She understood Morrison's psychology perfectly. He was establishing dominance, reinforcing the hierarchy, making sure everyone understood their place in his world. It was textbook small unit leadership, crude but often effective with genuine recruits who needed structure and discipline. Around them, the other members of Charlie Company watched with a mixture of sympathy and relief. Better Romano than them. Better her taking the heat while they finished their own work in peace. They saw Morrison's treatment of her as unfair but inevitable. This was the military, after all, and everyone had to pay their dues. What none of them understood, what Morrison himself couldn't possibly comprehend, was that Katie Romano had already paid dues that would have broken most of them. The calluses on her hands weren't from weeks of basic training. They were from years of operations in places that didn't appear on any map. The steadiness of her breathing under pressure wasn't learned from drill sergeants shouting in her face. It was carved into her nervous system by situations where panic meant death. She continued cleaning her weapon with the same methodical precision, each movement a small act of defiance disguised as compliance. Soon enough, someone would see past the carefully constructed facade of the nervous recruit. Soon enough, the truth would emerge. But for now, she was content to remain invisible, just another trainee struggling to meet military standards. The desert sun continued its relentless assault on the world outside, but inside the armory, the real heat was just beginning to build. 3 weeks into basic training at Fort Meridian, the morning sun blazed mercilessly across the Nevada desert as Charlie Company assembled for their daily weapons proficiency drill. The shooting range stretched out like a concrete monument to military precision, with covered firing positions arranged in perfect rows facing downrange targets that shimmered in the heat waves rising from the desert floor. The acrid smell of gunpowder from the previous day's exercises still lingered in the air, mixing with dust and the metallic tang of spent brass casings. Staff Sergeant Morrison stood at the center of the range like a king surveying his domain, his tactical vest straining against his barrel chest, wraparound sunglasses reflecting the harsh desert light. He held a clipboard in one massive hand and a stopwatch in the other, ready to time each recruit's performance and find new ways to demonstrate their inadequacy. Morrison lived for these moments, public displays where he could simultaneously build up his favorites and tear down those who didn't fit his narrow definition of soldier material. Listen up, ladies and gentlemen. Morrison's voice carried across the range with the authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. Today we separate the shooters from the pretenders. Today we find out who's got what it takes and who needs to go home to mommy and find a nice safe desk job. Katie Romano stood in the back row of assembled recruits, her M4A1 held at port arms with the same casual precision she brought to everything else. She had learned to make herself invisible during these group formations, to avoid Morrison's roving attention while still maintaining perfect military bearing. Her BDU uniform was immaculate but not obsessively so. Her boots properly shined but not mirror-bright, everything calibrated to blend in with the middle of the pack. "We're running a standard combat marksmanship course today," Morrison announced, consulting his clipboard with theatrical importance. 7 targets at varying distances, 42 rounds, maximum time limit of 4 minutes. Army standard for passing is 30 hits out of 42. My standard is better than Army standard. In Charlie Company, anything less than 35 hits means you do it again, and again, and again, until you get it right or wash out. He began walking slowly down the line of recruits, his predatory gaze evaluating each one. Some stood tall and confident, the natural athletes and former high school football players who had taken to military life like fish to water. Others betrayed their nervousness through small tells, shifting weight from foot to foot, unconscious adjustments of their equipment, the rapid blinking that betrayed racing hearts. Morrison stopped directly in front of Katie, close enough that she could smell the coffee and chewing tobacco on his breath. Well, look who we have here, Miss Perfect herself. Still obsessing over every little detail, Romano?" His voice carried clearly across the formation, ensuring every recruit could hear the exchange. "No, Staff Sergeant," Katie replied, her voice steady and neutral. She stared straight ahead, not meeting his eyes, following proper military protocol for addressing a superior. "No?" Morrison's eyebrows rose dramatically. "Could have fooled me. Word is you spent 3 hours cleaning that rifle last night. 3 hours, Romano. Most of these other recruits were done in 30 minutes and hitting the rack for some well-deserved sleep. But not our little perfectionist here. She's got to make everything just so. A few snickers rippled through the formation. Recruit Johnson, a cocky kid from Texas who had quickly established himself as Morrison's unofficial favorite, shook his head in exaggerated disbelief. Recruit Peters, standing 2 positions down from Katie, rolled his eyes and whispered something to the man next to him. The social hierarchy was crystallizing exactly as Morrison intended. Us versus her, normal soldiers versus the obsessive weirdo. Morrison stepped back and addressed the entire formation, but his words were clearly directed at Katie. You know what happens to people who overthink everything in combat? They hesitate. They analyze instead of acting. They get good soldiers killed because they're too busy making sure their equipment is pretty instead of learning how to use it effectively. Katie's breathing remained perfectly controlled, her expression unchanged. She had endured far worse psychological pressure in places where the stakes were infinitely higher than hurt feelings and damaged egos. But she also understood the game Morrison was playing. He was using her as an object lesson, a cautionary tale to motivate the others. It was crude psychology, but it worked on young recruits desperate to prove themselves. Tell you what, Romano, Morrison continued, his voice taking on a tone of mock generosity. Since you're so concerned with perfection, why don't you go first? Show all these other recruits how it's done. Show us what 3 hours of rifle polishing can accomplish. The formation went dead silent. Going first was always dangerous. No chance to observe others' techniques, no opportunity to learn from their mistakes. Morrison was setting her up for public failure, ensuring maximum humiliation when her perfectionism failed to translate into actual performance. Katie simply nodded once. Yes, Staff Sergeant. As she stepped forward toward the first firing position, she could feel the collective gaze of Charlie Company burning into her back. Some watched with sympathy, others with barely concealed schadenfreude, waiting to see the perfectionist get her comeuppance. Morrison followed behind her, making a show of checking his stopwatch and consulting his scoring sheet. Standard prone supported position, Morrison announced loudly. Targets at 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, and 350 meters. You'll engage each target in sequence, 6 rounds per target. Miss more than 7 shots total, and you're running this course again after evening chow. Miss more than 10, and you'll be having a very serious conversation with me about whether you belong in my company. Katie dropped smoothly into the prone position, her body settling into the classic shooting stance with unconscious grace. She pressed the rifle stock firmly into her shoulder, her cheek finding the perfect weld against the weapon, her support hand gripping the fore-end with precisely the right pressure. To the casual observer, she looked like any other recruit following proper shooting fundamentals. But there were subtle differences that only an expert eye would catch. The way her breathing naturally synchronized with her heart rate, the micro-adjustments she made to account for wind conditions that hadn't even been mentioned in the briefing, the manner in which her entire body seemed to become an extension of the rifle itself. On my command, Morrison called out, his voice carrying a note of anticipation. He was expecting failure, counting on it. Ready on the right, ready on the left, ready on the firing line. Commence firing. What happened next would shatter every assumption Charlie Company had made about the quiet recruit who polished her rifle too much and kept to herself. But in that moment before she pulled the trigger, Katie Romano allowed herself one small smile that no one could see. Morrison wanted a demonstration. He was about to get one. The crack of Katie's rifle echoed across the desert range like thunder, each shot fired with mechanical precision that defied everything the assembled recruits thought they knew about marksmanship. While most trainees struggled to achieve basic accuracy at close range, Katie was systematically destroying targets at distances that would challenge seasoned marksmen. Her breathing pattern never changed, her position remained rock solid, and each trigger pull seemed to happen at the exact moment when physics and ballistics aligned in perfect harmony. Morrison stood behind her, his stopwatch forgotten in his hand as he watched through binoculars. What he was witnessing shouldn't have been possible. Recruits didn't shoot like this. Hell, most infantry soldiers didn't shoot like this. Each target bore precise hit patterns clustered in the center mass with surgical consistency. The 50-meter target looked like it had been attacked by a machine, 6 holes grouped so tightly they nearly overlapped. The 100-meter target showed the same impossible accuracy, and as Katie moved to increasingly distant targets, her performance didn't degrade. If anything, it seemed to improve. "Jesus Christ," whispered Recruit Thompson, his own confidence evaporating as he watched the display. The cocky Texan, who had been Morrison's unofficial favorite, suddenly felt very small and very inadequate. Around him, the other members of Charlie Company stood in stunned silence. Their earlier anticipation of Katie's failure transformed into something approaching awe and fear. By the time Katie engaged the final target at 350 meters, a distance where most recruits would be lucky to hit the target frame at all, the entire range had fallen into absolute silence except for the rhythmic crack of her rifle. Even the range safety officers had stopped their usual patrol to watch. At that distance, the target appeared as little more than a dark speck through iron sights, requiring not just accuracy but an understanding of wind drift, bullet drop, and atmospheric conditions that took most soldiers years to develop. Katie's final 6 shots rang out in steady succession, each separated by exactly 3 seconds of perfect stillness. When the last echo faded across the desert, she safed her weapon with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else, rose from the prone position, and stepped back from the firing line. Her breathing was steady, her uniform barely dusty from the prone position, her expression as neutral as if she had just completed the most routine training exercise imaginable. Morrison lowered his binoculars with hands that had developed a slight tremor. 42 rounds fired, 42 hits scored. Not just hits, perfect center mass impacts that would have been impressive from a seasoned sniper, let alone a basic training recruit. The mathematical impossibility of what he had just witnessed made his head spin. In 15 years of training soldiers, he had never seen anything remotely comparable. The uncomfortable silence stretched across the range as Morrison struggled to process what had just happened. His carefully constructed narrative about Katie Romano, the obsessive perfectionist who would crack under pressure, lay in ruins around him like the shredded remains of the downrange targets. The other recruits shifted nervously, sensing that something fundamental had just changed in the power dynamics of Charlie Company. It was at that moment that the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors began echoing across Fort Meridian's desert landscape. The sound grew steadily louder until a UH-60 Black Hawk appeared over the eastern mountains, its dark silhouette stark against the brilliant Nevada sky. The helicopter circled the base once before settling into a landing pattern toward the main helipad, kicking up massive clouds of desert dust that drifted across the training areas. Morrison's radio crackled to life with urgent chatter about VIP arrivals and security protocols. Through the static, he caught fragments about a surprise inspection visit and immediate preparation requirements. The timing was impossibly inconvenient. He had 41 more recruits to put through the marksmanship course, and now base command was scrambling to accommodate some unannounced brass who had decided to drop in without warning. "All right, listen up," Morrison shouted over the helicopter noise. His voice strained as he tried to reassert control over a situation that was rapidly spinning away from him. "We've got VIP visitors incoming. Range is temporarily suspended. Everyone police your brass and secure your weapons. We're moving back to the company area for equipment inspection in 30 minutes. As Charlie Company began the mechanical process of cleaning up the range, Morrison found his gaze repeatedly drawn back to Katie Romano. She moved through the equipment securing process with the same calm efficiency she brought to everything else, but there was something different about her demeanor now. The careful invisibility she had maintained for weeks was beginning to crack, replaced by something harder and more confident. It was subtle, a slight change in her posture, the way she carried her rifle with unconscious familiarity, the manner in which she seemed to anticipate orders before they were given. The Black Hawk had settled onto the main helipad, its rotors winding down with a gradually decreasing whine. Through the heat shimmer rising from the tarmac, Morrison could make out figures disembarking from the aircraft. Even at distance, their bearing and the crisp urgency of the base personnel rushing to greet them suggested this was no routine inspection. Senior officers didn't arrive unannounced in Black Hawks unless something significant was happening. 20 minutes later, As Charlie Company formed up in front of their barracks for the hastily arranged equipment inspection, Morrison caught his first clear glimpse of the VIP who had disrupted his training schedule. General Patricia, Iron Lady Blackthorn, emerged from the base commander's vehicle like a force of nature given human form. She was a compact woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes like chips of Arctic ice. Her desert camouflage uniform bore the subdued stars of a two-star general, along with ribbons and badges that told the story of a career spent in the most dangerous corners of the world. Blackthorn moved with the fluid economy of motion that marked professional soldiers who had spent decades in the field. Her gaze swept across the assembled company with the cold efficiency of someone accustomed to evaluating human assets and finding most of them wanting. She was accompanied by a small entourage of staff officers and senior NCOs, all bearing the hard-edged competence of special operations personnel. Morrison snapped to attention as the general approached. His earlier swagger replaced by the nervous energy of a middle-ranking NCO suddenly thrust into the spotlight of senior command attention. General Blackthorn, ma'am. Staff Sergeant Morrison, Charlie Company. The company is formed and ready for your inspection, ma'am. General Blackthorn nodded curtly, her attention already shifting to scan the ranks of assembled recruits. Her eyes moved systematically from face to face, evaluating, cataloging, dismissing. Most of the young soldiers wilted under her gaze, suddenly aware of every imperfection in their appearance and bearing. But when her attention reached the back rank where Romano stood at attention, something changed. The general's systematic scan stopped abruptly. Her ice-blue eyes locked onto Katie with laser focus, studying her with an intensity that made the desert heat seem cool by comparison. There was recognition there, followed immediately by something that might have been shock, carefully controlled but unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read the subtle tells of professional soldiers under stress. The general's gaze moved from Katie's face down to her hands that gripped her rifle with unconscious competence, hands that bore calluses and patterns that told specific stories to those who knew how to read them. For a long moment, the two women stared at each other across the formation, and Morrison had the distinct impression that an entire conversation was taking place in a language he couldn't understand. When General Blackthorn finally spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Staff Sergeant Morrison, I want to speak with that recruit. She pointed directly at Romano, the one in the back rank. Bring her forward. Morrison's confusion was evident as he processed the unexpected request. Ma'am? Recruit Romano? She's just... is there a specific reason? Now, Sergeant. The general cut him off, her tone brooking no argument. As Morrison hurried to comply with the order, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. Some piece of information that would make sense of the general's intense interest in his most problematic recruit. The woman who had just shot like a professional sniper was now drawing the personal attention of a two-star general, and Morrison's comfortable understanding of military hierarchy was beginning to crumble around the edges. Romano stepped forward from the formation with the precise movements of someone who had done this many times before. As she approached the general, her expression remained neutral, but there was a subtle shift in her bearing. A straightening of the shoulders, a slight lifting of the chin that suggested she was preparing for something Morrison couldn't even begin to imagine. Romano stepped forward from the formation with movements that seemed to flow like water, each step precise and economical. The distance between her position in the back rank and where General Blackthorn stood felt like crossing a minefield. Every eye in Charlie Company was focused on her. Morrison's confusion was palpable, and the general's ice-blue gaze never wavered from her face. As she closed the distance, Katie could feel something shifting in the air around them, a tension that went far beyond a routine inspection. Halt! General Blackthorn commanded when Katie was 3 paces away. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had given orders in places where hesitation meant death. State your name and rank, recruit. Recruit Katelyn Romano, ma'am, Katie replied, her voice steady and clear. She maintained perfect attention position, shoulders back, chin up, eyes focused on a point just above the general's head. But there was something different in her bearing now, a subtle confidence that hadn't been there during Morrison's harassment sessions. General Blackthorn studied her for a long moment, her gaze moving from Katie's face down to her hands, then back up to meet her eyes directly. The general's expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity to her scrutiny that made the surrounding staff officers shift nervously. This was clearly more than a routine inspection interaction. "You shoot well, Romano," the general said finally, her tone neutral but with an undertone that suggested she knew exactly how well Katie had performed on the range. "Staff Sergeant Morrison tells me you just completed the combat marksmanship course with perfect scores. That's unusual for a recruit at your stage of training." Morrison started slightly, surprised that the general had already received detailed information about the morning's training. He hadn't had time to file any reports, which meant someone else had been watching and reporting directly to senior command. The realization sent an uncomfortable chill down his spine. "Yes, ma'am," Katie replied simply, offering no elaboration or explanation for her performance. General Blackthorn took a step closer, close enough that her next words would be audible only to Katie, Morrison, and perhaps one or two of the nearest staff officers. "Tell me, Romano, where did you learn to shoot like that? Most recruits can barely hit the broadside of a barn at 50 meters, but you were putting rounds through the same hole at 350. That's not beginner's luck." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Katie could feel Morrison's attention boring into her, could sense the collective curiosity of the assembled company. This was the moment when her carefully constructed facade would either hold or crumble completely. She had known this day would come eventually, had known that her skills were too distinctive to hide indefinitely, but she hadn't expected it to happen quite so soon or quite so publicly. "I grew up hunting with my father in Montana, ma'am," Katie said, delivering the cover story she had prepared months ago. "Started shooting when I was 8 years old. Small game at first, then larger targets at longer distances. Spent most weekends on the range or in the field." It was a plausible explanation, one that would satisfy most questioners. Rural upbringing, family tradition of marksmanship, natural talent developed over years of practice. General Blackthorn nodded slowly, but her eyes never left Katie's face, and there was something in her expression that suggested the hunting story wasn't quite enough to explain what she had witnessed. "Montana hunting," the general repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting. Tell me, Romano, what was your favorite rifle growing up? What did you use for those long-distance shots?" Katie felt the first flutter of real concern. The general's questions were becoming more specific, more probing. A casual inquiry about shooting ability was one thing, but this level of detailed interest suggested something more significant was happening. "Remington 700 in .308, ma'am," Katie replied, choosing a common hunting rifle that would support her cover story. "My father's rifle originally, but he let me use it once I proved I could handle the recoil and make clean shots." General Blackthorn's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, and for just a moment, Katie thought she detected a hint of approval in those ice-blue eyes. The .308 was indeed an excellent choice for long-range hunting, powerful enough for large game and accurate enough for precision shots. But it was also the civilian version of the 7.62mm NATO round used in military sniper systems, and Katie's choice revealed a familiarity with ballistics that went beyond casual hunting experience. "Show me your hands," the general said suddenly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The request caught Katie off guard, but she complied immediately, extending her hands palm up for inspection. General Blackthorn leaned forward slightly, studying Katie's palms and fingers with the intensity of a forensic examiner. What she saw there made her breath catch almost imperceptibly. Katie's hands told a story that had nothing to do with hunting deer in Montana. The calluses were wrong, too specific, too purposeful for general rifle work. There was a distinctive pattern along her trigger finger that spoke of thousands of rounds fired in training environments. Her palms bore marks from rappelling ropes and tactical equipment. Most telling of all, there were faint white lines across her knuckles that looked suspiciously like scars from combat gloves worn in sandy, abrasive environments. But it was what General Blackthorn saw on Katie's forearms that made the world around them seem to freeze. As Katie extended her hands, her sleeves rode up slightly, revealing the edge of what appeared to be a small tattoo on her inner wrist. It was barely visible, just the corner of what might have been a trident design, partially hidden by her uniform sleeve. General Blackthorn's eyes locked onto that small patch of visible ink with laser focus. Her own breathing became carefully controlled, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to something approaching shock. She recognized that particular design, knew exactly what it signified and how few people in the world were authorized to wear it. "Staff Sergeant Morrison," the general said suddenly, her voice carrying a new edge of authority. "I need to speak with Recruit Romano privately. Clear the area of all personnel except essential staff." Morrison's confusion was evident, but he knew better than to question a direct order from a two-star general. "Yes, ma'am. Charlie Company. Fall out and return to barracks. Move." As the recruits began dispersing under Morrison's shouted commands, Katie found herself standing alone with General Blackthorn and a small group of senior staff officers. The general waited until the last of the recruits had moved out of earshot before speaking again. "That tattoo on your wrist," the general said quietly, her voice barely audible over the desert wind. "I can see just the edge of it. Would you mind showing me the rest?" Katie's heart rate increased slightly, but her expression remained neutral. This was the moment she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed back her left sleeve, revealing a small but unmistakable Navy SEAL trident tattooed on her inner wrist. The design was subtle, professionally done, and positioned exactly where it would normally be hidden by uniform sleeves. General Blackthorn stared at the tattoo for a long moment, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. When she finally looked back up at Katie's face, her expression had completely transformed. The professional curiosity was gone, replaced by something approaching reverence mixed with deep concern. "The only way to earn that tattoo," the general said slowly, "is to complete BUD/S training and serve with a SEAL team. But according to your personnel file, you're Katelyn Romano from Billings, Montana, with no prior military service. So either that's a very foolish fake tattoo, or someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to create a completely false identity." Katie met the general's gaze directly for the first time, and when she spoke, her voice carried a quiet authority that hadn't been there moments before. "The tattoo is real, ma'am." The admission hung in the desert air like a bomb waiting to explode, and General Blackthorn realized that what she had initially thought was a routine inspection visit had just become something far more complex and potentially dangerous. The admission that the SEAL trident was real sent ripples of tension through the small group of senior officers gathered around General Blackthorn. Colonel Hayes, the base commander, shifted his weight nervously as he processed the implications. Major Chun, the general's aide-de-camp, made a subtle hand gesture that caused the remaining staff officers to take several steps back, creating a wider security perimeter around the conversation. General Blackthorn studied Katie's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that could have national security implications. The woman standing before her was either an elaborate fraud or someone operating under the deepest possible cover. Given the shooting performance she had just witnessed and the authentic trident tattoo, fraud seemed increasingly unlikely. "If that tattoo is real," the general said carefully, "then you've successfully deceived military personnel investigators, passed through an extensive background check process, and enlisted under a false identity. That's either the work of an enemy intelligence service or—" she paused, considering the alternatives. "Or you're one of ours, operating under official cover for reasons I'm not cleared to know about." Katie remained at attention, her expression giving away nothing. But there was a subtle shift in her posture, a barely perceptible relaxation that suggested she was relieved to finally be having this conversation with someone who understood the implications of what they were discussing. "Ma'am, I cannot discuss the details of my background or current mission parameters without proper authorization codes and secure communication channels," Katie said, her voice taking on the crisp formality of someone who had given similar responses many times before. "What I can tell you is that my presence here serves legitimate national security interests." The words confirmed General Blackthorn's growing suspicions. Katie Romano, if that was even her real name, was operating under some form of official cover. The question was whether she was here as part of a sanctioned operation or if something had gone seriously wrong with whatever mission had placed her in basic training. "Staff Sergeant Morrison," the general called out sharply. Morrison had been hovering at the edge of the security perimeter, trying to overhear the conversation while maintaining the pretense of organizing his scattered company. He jogged over immediately, his face flushed from the desert heat and nervous energy. "Yes, ma'am. I want you to arrange private quarters for recruit Romano immediately. She's to be isolated from the rest of Charlie Company pending further orders. No contact with other personnel without my direct authorization. Is that understood?" Morrison's confusion was written across his face in bold letters. "Ma'am, if there's been some kind of security violation, I should report this through proper channels to Sergeant." General Blackthorne cut him off with ice in her voice. "You will follow my orders exactly as given. Recruit Romano is now under my direct authority. Any questions about this arrangement will be addressed through me personally. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am," Morrison replied, though his expression suggested he was anything but clear about what was happening to his company. As Morrison hurried away to make the arrangements, General Blackthorne turned her attention back to Katie. The desert wind had picked up, carrying grit and the distant sound of ongoing training exercises from other parts of the base. Around them, the normal rhythm of military life continued, oblivious to the extraordinary conversation taking place. "Before we go any further," the general said quietly, "I need to know if you're here voluntarily or if you've been compromised in some way. Are you operating under duress? Do you need immediate extraction?" The question revealed the general's primary concern. If Katie was a legitimate operator who had been burned or compromised, then her presence at Fort Meridian might indicate a serious breach of operational security that could have far-reaching consequences. Katie considered her response carefully. She had been dreading this moment for months, but now that it had arrived, she felt an unexpected sense of relief. Living under cover was exhausting, requiring constant vigilance to maintain the facade of incompetence while suppressing instincts and training that had been beaten into her nervous system over years of operations. "I am here voluntarily, ma'am," she said finally. "My mission parameters are unconventional but legitimate. I cannot provide details without secure communications and proper authorization, but I can confirm that my presence here does not represent a security breach or operational compromise." General Blackthorne nodded slowly, processing the implications. If Katie was telling the truth, and her instincts suggested she was, then this was likely some form of deep cover assignment, possibly related to internal security or counterintelligence. The military had been increasingly concerned about infiltration attempts and insider threats, and placing experienced operators in training environments to observe and report would make tactical sense. "There's going to be a problem," the general said, gesturing toward the direction Morrison had gone. "Your performance on the range this morning was too distinctive. Word is going to spread through the base, and eventually it will reach people who might start asking uncomfortable questions." "How long has your cover been holding?" 3 weeks since I arrived here," Katie replied. "Prior to that, 6 months of preparation and documentation creation. The marksmanship display was unplanned. I intended to perform at average levels, but Staff Sergeant Morrison's training methods created a situation where maintaining cover required accepting public humiliation or demonstrating competence. I chose competence." The general almost smiled at that. The decision revealed a practical wisdom that she respected. Maintaining cover was important, but not at the expense of mission effectiveness or personal integrity. Morrison's bullying tactics had inadvertently forced Katie into a corner where her training took over. "What's your real specialty?" General Blackthorne asked. "I can see you're SEAL qualified, but that tattoo placement and the way you handle yourself suggests something more specific. Scout sniper? Direct action? Maritime operations?" Katie hesitated for a moment before answering. "Maritime interdiction specialist, ma'am. Primary focus on port security and underwater approach techniques. Secondary qualifications in sniper operations and close protection detail work." The specialization made perfect sense given what the general had observed. Maritime interdiction required the same precision shooting skills Katie had displayed, along with the physical conditioning and mental discipline that had allowed her to maintain cover under Morrison's pressure. It also suggested that her current mission might be related to port security concerns or threats to naval installations. "I'm going to need to make some secure calls," General Blackthorn said. "Colonel Hayes will escort you to temporary quarters where you can wait while I sort this out. Do not discuss this conversation with anyone, including Colonel Hayes. If anyone asks questions, refer them directly to me." As they began walking toward the base administration building, Katie felt the weight of weeks of careful deception finally lifting from her shoulders. The relief was almost overwhelming. She could stop pretending to struggle with basic military concepts, stop tolerating Morrison's ignorant condescension, stop hiding the competence that defined her professional identity. But she also knew that her mission had just become infinitely more complicated. General Blackthorn would be making calls to very senior levels of command, and depending on what those conversations revealed, Katie's carefully planned operation might be about to take a dramatic turn. The desert sun continued its relentless assault on Fort Meridian, but for the first time in months, Katie Romano felt like she could finally stop hiding in the shadows and begin operating in the light. Whatever came next, at least she wouldn't have to pretend to be someone she wasn't. The real question was whether her superiors would be pleased or furious that her cover had been blown so spectacularly. 3 hours after her conversation with General Blackthorn, Katie found herself alone in a sparse but comfortable VIP quarters normally reserved for visiting officers. The room was a significant upgrade from the cramped barracks she had shared with 5 other recruits. Private bathroom, desk, secure communication equipment, and most importantly, complete isolation from the curious eyes and whispered speculation that would inevitably follow her mysterious removal from Charlie Company. She sat on the narrow bed, still wearing her desert camouflage uniform but with her boots unlaced and her equipment belt hung carefully on the room's single chair. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to truly relax, feeling the constant tension of maintaining cover slowly ebbing from her shoulders and neck. The relief was profound, like taking off body armor after a long patrol. A sharp knock on the door interrupted her moment of respite. "Come in," she called, automatically straightening her posture and reaching for her boots. General Blackthorn entered, followed by a tall, lean man in his early 50s wearing the subdued eagles of a full colonel. The newcomer had the weathered look of someone who had spent serious time in combat zones, with laugh lines around his eyes that didn't quite hide the predatory alertness of a career special operations officer. "Romano," the general said, "I'd like you to meet Colonel Marcus Webb, Commanding Officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 3. He's here to clarify your situation." Katie stood immediately, snapping to attention. She recognized Webb's name from briefings and operational reports, though she had never worked directly under his command. He was legendary within the SEAL community, a plank owner from the early days of DevGru who had transitioned into high-level planning and coordination roles while maintaining operational credibility. Colonel Webb studied her for a long moment, his gaze professional but searching. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. "At ease, Petty Officer Rodriguez," he said, using what Katie assumed was her real name. "We need to talk." The use of her actual identity sent a chill through Katie's system. If Colonel Webb was here and using her real name, then her cover operation had just reached a level of exposure that could compromise not just her mission, but potentially other ongoing operations. "Sir, I was operating under strict parameters to maintain operational security," she said carefully. "My instructions were to avoid contact with command authority unless directly compromised or mission parameters changed." Webb nodded, settling into the room's single chair while General Blackthorn remained standing near the door. "Your mission parameters just changed dramatically, Rodriguez. General Blackthorn's report about your performance this morning triggered some very high-level conversations in Washington. It seems your cover assignment has intersected with a developing situation that requires immediate attention." Katie felt her stomach tighten. Cover assignments were typically long-term, low-risk operations designed to provide intelligence or security assessment over extended periods. The fact that her position was suddenly being activated for immediate operational use suggested something significant had happened. "What kind of situation, sir?" she asked. Colonel Webb pulled out a secure tablet and activated its screen, showing satellite imagery of what appeared to be a coastal military installation. 3 days ago, we intercepted communications indicating a possible threat to Naval Weapons Station Seal Beach in California. The intelligence suggests an inside job, someone with legitimate access planning to compromise security during a major weapons transfer operation scheduled for next week. Katie studied the satellite imagery, recognizing the distinctive layout of the weapons station from previous briefings. Seal Beach was one of the Navy's primary ammunition storage and transfer facilities, handling everything from small arms rounds to major ordnance for ship and submarine loadouts. A security breach there could have catastrophic consequences. The problem, Webb continued, is that we don't know who we can trust at the installation. The threat assessment suggests the compromise comes from someone with significant access and knowledge of security protocols. Traditional investigation methods would take weeks or months, and we don't have that kind of time. General Blackthorne stepped forward, adding context to Webb's briefing. Your performance this morning demonstrated capabilities that weren't in any of your training records. When I ran your real identity through the system, I discovered that Petty Officer Rodriguez has qualifications specifically relevant to this situation. Katie began to understand where this conversation was heading, and she didn't like the implications. Sir, my cover here was designed to be long-term and low-profile. Activating me for immediate operational use would compromise months of careful positioning. The positioning is already compromised, Webb said bluntly. Your shooting demonstration this morning was witnessed by 40-plus people, including several who have connections to the broader military community. Word will spread, questions will be asked, and your cover identity will start attracting exactly the kind of attention we've been trying to avoid. He was right, and Katie knew it. Morrison's public humiliation had forced her into a demonstration that revealed capabilities no basic training recruit should possess. The performance had been so distinctive that it would inevitably generate stories and speculation that could unravel her carefully constructed false identity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What's the mission, sir? She asked, accepting the inevitable. Webb tapped the tablet screen, shifting the display to show personnel files and security clearance records. We need someone who can infiltrate the weapons station, assess internal security, and identify potential threats without triggering suspicion. Your SEAL qualifications and maritime security background make you perfect for the assignment, and your current cover identity provides the perfect insertion method. Katie studied the mission briefing materials, her tactical mind automatically processing the security challenges and operational requirements. Naval Weapons Station Seal Beach was a hardened military facility with multiple layers of security, but it also required constant interaction with personnel from various commands and specialties. A transfer from basic training to temporary duty assignment wouldn't be unusual, especially if properly documented and authorized. Timeline? She asked. 48 hours for mission preparation and insertion, General Blackthorne replied. The weapons transfer operation begins Monday morning, which gives you approximately 1 week to assess the situation and identify the threat. Webb leaned forward, his expression serious. Rodriguez, I want to be clear about something. This mission carries significant risk, not just to you personally, but to ongoing national security operations. If the weapons station is compromised during a major transfer, we're looking at potential casualties and the loss of critical ordnance that's destined for fleet operations in the Pacific. Katie nodded, understanding the broader implications. Naval weapons transfers involved everything from standard ammunition to specialized ordnance for submarine operations and special warfare missions. A successful attack or sabotage operation could cripple fleet readiness for months. I'll need complete mission briefing materials, updated threat assessments, and authorization for necessary equipment requisition, she said, her voice taking on the crisp professionalism of someone shifting into operational mode. Already being prepared, Webb confirmed. You'll also be working with a small support team, though they won't know your real identity or mission specifics. As far as they're concerned, you're exactly what your cover identity suggests, a recruit being transferred for specialized training. General Blackthorne moved toward the door, then paused. Rodriguez, there's one more thing. Your performance this morning didn't just compromise your cover. It also caught the attention of some people who might have connections to the threat we're investigating. We believe the timing of your exposure and the intelligence we received about Seal Beach isn't coincidental. The implication sent a chill through Katie's system. If her cover had been deliberately blown as part of a larger operation, then she might already be walking into a trap. The mission had just become infinitely more complex and dangerous. Understood, ma'am, Katie replied, her mind already beginning to shift into the operational mindset that had kept her alive through years of high-risk assignments. As the senior officers prepared to leave, Webb turned back one final time. Rodriguez, your orders are to assess, identify, and report. You are not authorized for direct action unless absolutely necessary for mission preservation or personal survival. This is an intelligence operation, not a combat mission. Katie nodded, though she suspected that the distinction might prove academic once she was on the ground at Seal Beach. In her experience, intelligence operations in hostile environments had a tendency to become combat missions whether anyone planned for it or not. 26 hours after her emergency briefing with Colonel Webb, Katie found herself seated in the passenger compartment of a military transport helicopter flying low over the California coastline toward Naval Weapons Station Seal Beach. The mission briefing materials in her waterproof case contained everything she needed to know about the facility's layout, security protocols, and the personnel she would be working alongside, but they also contained troubling intelligence that made this assignment far more dangerous than a typical reconnaissance operation. The helicopter's crew chief, a weathered petty officer with 20 years of service, leaned over to shout above the rotor noise. 5 minutes to LZ, ma'am. Winds are picking up from the southwest, so it might be a bumpy insertion. Katie nodded her acknowledgement, checking her equipment one final time. She was traveling light, standard sea bag with basic personal gear, official transfer orders identifying her as Specialist Romano being assigned to temporary duty for advanced weapons handling training, and a concealed communications kit that would allow secure contact with Colonel Webb's support team. Her SEAL equipment and specialized gear would be provided through separate channels once she was established at the facility. Through the helicopter's small porthole, she could see the sprawling complex of Naval Weapons Station Seal Beach taking shape below them. The facility covered over 5,000 acres of Southern California coastline, with massive ammunition storage bunkers, ship loading piers, and security perimeters that made it look more like a fortress than a simple storage depot. From the air, she could observe the careful positioning of guard towers, the multiple fence lines with their sensors and detection equipment, and the patrol patterns of security personnel moving between the various operational areas. What troubled her most about the intelligence briefing was the sophistication of the threat they were facing. The intercepted communications suggested intimate knowledge of the facility's security protocols, shift schedules, and the specific timing of the upcoming weapons transfer operation. This wasn't random terrorism or opportunistic crime. It was a carefully planned operation by someone with legitimate access and detailed operational knowledge. The helicopter began its final approach to the facility's landing zone, a concrete pad surrounded by fuel storage tanks and maintenance buildings. Katie could see personnel on the ground preparing to receive the aircraft, including what appeared to be a senior petty officer with the bearing of someone accustomed to handling new arrivals and temporary duty assignments. As the aircraft touched down with a solid thump, Katie gathered her gear and prepared for what she knew would be a challenging insertion into an environment where everyone was potentially suspect. The rotor wash kicked up clouds of dust and debris as she exited the helicopter, keeping her head low until she was clear of the aircraft's danger zone. The senior petty officer approached her immediately, his voice professionally friendly, but with the underlying wariness that characterized all military personnel working in sensitive installations. Specialist Romano? I'm Chief Petty Officer Williams, Facility Operations Coordinator. Welcome to Seal Beach. Thank you, Chief, Katie replied, adopting the slightly nervous demeanor appropriate for a junior enlisted person arriving at an intimidating new assignment. I appreciate the pickup. This place is a lot bigger than I expected. Williams smiled, leading her toward a waiting vehicle. Most people have that reaction. We handle ammunition for the entire Pacific Fleet here, so size comes with the territory. Your temporary duty orders indicate you're here for advanced weapons handling certification. That's unusual for someone at your pay grade. Katie had prepared for this question during her mission briefing. I scored exceptionally well on the marksmanship evaluations at Fort Meridian, Chief. Command decided to fast-track me for specialized training to see if I have potential for advanced assignments. It was a plausible cover story that explained her presence without revealing any classified information. Williams nodded approvingly as they climbed into the vehicle, a standard military utility truck equipped with radio gear and security equipment. We don't get many people from basic training for this kind of assignment, Williams continued as they began driving through the facility. Usually, advanced weapons handling goes to personnel with at least 2 years of service. Must have been some impressive shooting to get Command's attention. Katie allowed herself a small smile. I grew up hunting in Montana, Chief. Been around firearms since I was 8 years old. Military training just gave me better discipline and technique. As they drove through the facility, Katie cataloged everything she observed: security checkpoint procedures, personnel movement patterns, the positioning of cameras and sensors, the general alertness level of guards and workers. What she saw was concerning. While the facility's physical security was impressive, the human security showed signs of complacency that could be exploited by someone with insider knowledge. Guards at checkpoints were performing routine inspections without the heightened awareness she would expect given the intelligence about potential threats. Personnel moved through secure areas with the casual familiarity of people who had become too comfortable with their environment. Most troubling of all, she observed several instances where security protocols appeared to be abbreviated or bypassed entirely, suggesting that convenience had gradually eroded proper procedures. Williams parked outside a complex of administrative buildings near the facility's main ammunition storage area. Your quarters are in Building C, Room 247. You'll be sharing with Petty Officer Sarah Martinez. She's one of our ordnance specialists. Been here about 18 months. Good person to help you learn the ropes. As they unloaded Katie's gear, Williams handed her a temporary access badge and a facility orientation packet. Your training schedule starts tomorrow morning at 0800 with Lieutenant Commander Jackson, the facility training officer. Tonight, you can get settled and maybe grab chow with Martinez. The dining facility serves until 2,100 hours. Katie thanked Williams and made her way to Building C, noting the security measures around the accommodation areas. The buildings were positioned to provide clear sight lines for surveillance, with limited access points and proximity sensors that would detect unauthorized movement during overnight hours. It was competent security design, but she also noticed several potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone familiar with the layout. Room 247 was a standard 2-person military accommodation with separate sleeping areas, shared bathroom facilities, and a small common area with basic furniture and a television. Katie's roommate was apparently still on duty, giving her time to settle in and begin her covert assessment of the facility's internal security. She was unpacking her gear when her secure communication device vibrated with an incoming message from Colonel Webb's support team. The message was brief but alarming. Flash priority. Recent signals intelligence indicates operation timeline accelerated. Threat assessment suggests activation within 48 to 72 hours. Expedite assessment and identification. Support assets positioning for emergency extraction if required. Katie stared at the message, feeling her heart rate increase as the implications sank in. The weapons transfer operation wasn't scheduled to begin for another 5 days, but if the threat timeline had accelerated, it meant the conspirators might be planning to strike before the major transfer even began. That suggested the target might not be the weapons themselves, but rather the facility's security infrastructure or personnel. She was deleting the message when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside, followed by the sound of someone unlocking the door. Katie quickly secured her communication device and adopted a casual posture as her roommate entered. Petty Officer Sarah Martinez was a compact woman in her mid-20s with the confident bearing of someone who worked with dangerous ordnance on a daily basis. She carried herself with the unconscious precision of someone accustomed to working in environments where mistakes could be fatal, and her initial assessment of Katie was clearly both professional and personal. "You must be Romano," Martinez said, setting down her gear bag and extending her hand. "Sarah Martinez, welcome to the weapons station. Hope you're ready for some interesting training. We don't usually get people straight from basic," but word is you shot the lights out at Fort Meridian. Katie shook her hand, noting the calluses that spoke of serious time handling heavy ordnance and equipment. Thanks. I'm looking forward to the training. This facility is impressive. Much bigger and more complex than anything I expected. Martinez smiled, but Katie noticed her eyes remained alert and evaluative. It's definitely a serious operation. We handle everything from small arms ammunition to major ordnance for carrier operations and submarine loadouts. Safety and security are absolutely critical. One mistake here could cost lives and compromise fleet readiness. As Martinez continued talking about facility operations and safety procedures, Katie found herself wondering if her roommate might be more than she appeared. The woman's knowledge of facility operations seemed unusually comprehensive for someone with 18 months of service, and her casual mention of specific operational details suggested access to information that might normally be compartmentalized. By the time they headed to the dining facility for evening chow, Katie realized that her mission had just become exponentially more complex. Not only did she need to identify potential security threats among the facility's personnel, but she also had to consider the possibility that the threat might be sitting right next to her, sharing casual conversation and offering helpful orientation to the new arrival. The crisis was no longer approaching. It was already here, hidden behind friendly faces and routine military efficiency. The dining facility at Naval Weapons Station Seal Beach buzzed with the controlled energy of military personnel transitioning from day shift to evening operations. Katie followed Martinez through the serving line, observing the interactions between different groups of personnel while maintaining her cover as an impressed new arrival overwhelmed by the facility's scale and complexity. "The food's actually pretty decent here," Martinez said, loading her tray with what appeared to be reasonably appetizing meatloaf and vegetables. "Much better than most installations I've been stationed at. One of the perks of being assigned to a high-priority facility. They keep morale up with good chow and decent accommodations." Katie nodded appreciatively, but her attention was focused on cataloging the personnel around them. She identified ordnance specialists by their distinctive uniforms and safety equipment, security personnel by their tactical gear and alert postures, and what appeared to be a significant number of civilian contractors whose presence at a sensitive weapons facility raised immediate questions about access control and background verification procedures. They found seats at a table near the center of the dining hall, positioning Katie where she could observe most of the room while maintaining casual conversation with Martinez. As they began eating, Martinez launched into what appeared to be a helpful orientation briefing about facility operations, personnel, and the various training programs available to someone with Katie's supposed background. "Lieutenant Commander Jackson runs most of the advanced weapons training," Martinez explained between bites. "He's former EOD, really knows his stuff about ordnance handling and safety procedures. The training you'll be getting is usually reserved for people with much more experience, so he might push you pretty hard to see if you can handle it." Katie filed away the information about Jackson while continuing to scan the dining hall. What troubled her was the casual mixing of personnel with different security clearances and access levels. Ordnance specialists sat with maintenance workers, security guards shared tables with civilian contractors, and there appeared to be minimal compartmentalization of information or social interaction between groups that should probably maintain professional separation. "That group over there," Martinez said quietly, nodding toward a table where 4 men in civilian clothes were engaged in intense conversation. "They're part of the logistics coordination team for next week's major transfer operation. Civilian contractors who handle scheduling and transportation coordination. They've been here for about 2 weeks getting everything set up." The information sent alarm bells ringing in Katie's mind. Civilian contractors with detailed knowledge of transfer operations, timing, and logistics were exactly the kind of personnel who could provide insider access for a coordinated attack. Their presence at the facility for an extended period would give them time to observe security procedures and identify vulnerabilities. "Seems like a lot of civilian involvement for a military operation," Katie observed carefully, testing Martinez's response. Martinez shrugged. "It's become pretty standard for major operations. The Navy doesn't have enough personnel to handle all the logistics coordination, so they contract it out to companies with security clearances and specialized expertise. Those guys have been through extensive background checks and have legitimate need-to-know access." Katie nodded, but privately noted that extensive background checks didn't guarantee loyalty or identify personnel who might be compromised after their initial clearance investigation. The civilian contractors represented a potential security vulnerability that would require careful evaluation. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a tall, lean man in his 40s wearing the khaki uniform of a senior chief petty officer. His bearing immediately identified him as someone with significant authority and experience, and his direct approach to their table suggested he had specific business with one or both of them. "Specialist Romano?" he said, extending his hand as Katie stood to acknowledge his approach. "Senior Chief Petty Officer David Kowalski, Facility Security Coordinator. I wanted to introduce myself and welcome you to Seal Beach." Katie shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the way his eyes evaluated her with professional interest. "Thank you, Senior Chief. I appreciate the welcome. This is an impressive facility." "Your reputation preceded you," Kowalski said with a slight smile. "Word from Fort Meridian is that you demonstrated some exceptional marksmanship capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Jackson is looking forward to working with you, but I wanted to discuss a few security matters first." The mention of security matters in front of Martinez made Katie slightly uncomfortable, but she maintained her cover persona. "Of course, Senior Chief. Whatever you need to discuss." "Nothing too formal," Kowalski assured her. "Just standard orientation for someone who'll be working around sensitive ordnance. The security briefing covers facility protocols, emergency procedures, and the importance of maintaining operational security. We'll handle that tomorrow morning before your training begins." As Kowalski prepared to leave, he paused and looked directly at Katie with an intensity that made her wonder if he suspected more about her background than he was letting on. "One thing I always tell new personnel: this facility handles ordnance that could level city blocks if mishandled or misappropriated. We take security very seriously here, and we expect everyone to be alert for anything unusual or suspicious. The safety of thousands of people depends on everyone doing their job correctly." After Kowalski departed, Martinez leaned forward with a conspiratorial expression. "Senior Chief takes security very seriously, sometimes too seriously if you ask some people around here. He's been pushing for increased security protocols and additional background checks for the civilian contractors. Some of the logistics people think he's being paranoid." Katie filed away this information as potentially significant. If Kowalski was concerned about security vulnerabilities related to civilian contractors, he might be a valuable ally in her investigation. Alternatively, his high-profile advocacy for increased security might make him a target if there were indeed insider threats planning to compromise the facility. "Has there been any specific reason for increased security concerns?" Katie asked carefully. Martinez glanced around the dining hall before answering. "Nothing official, but there have been some incidents over the past few weeks. Equipment going missing, unauthorized access attempts, communications equipment being tampered with. Nothing major, but enough to make the security people nervous about the upcoming transfer operation." The pattern Martinez described was exactly what Katie would expect to see during the reconnaissance phase of a coordinated attack. Someone with insider access probing security systems, testing response procedures, and gathering intelligence about facility operations and vulnerabilities. "That does sound concerning," Katie agreed. "I imagine with all the civilian contractors around for the transfer operation, it would be difficult to track who has access to what areas." "Exactly," Martinez said. "That's part of what has Senior Chief worried. The contractors have legitimate access to areas and information that would normally be restricted, but their presence also creates opportunities for someone with bad intentions." As they finished their meal and prepared to return to their quarters, Katie's secure communication device vibrated with another incoming message. She excused herself to use the restroom, where she could safely check the communication in privacy. The message was from Colonel Webb's support team and contained intelligence that made her blood run cold. "Urgent. Signals intercepts indicate activation imminent. Target confirmed as weapons transfer operation. Estimated 6 to 8 hostile actors with insider support. Extraction assets on standby. Maintain cover but prepare for immediate operational transition if required." Katie deleted the message and returned to Martinez, her mind racing through the implications of the new intelligence. The threat wasn't just theoretical anymore, it was active, immediate, and involved multiple hostile actors with inside support. Her mission had just transitioned from reconnaissance to active counterintelligence, and she was potentially surrounded by people who might be part of the conspiracy. As they walked back to their quarters through the facility's well-lit pathways, Katie found herself evaluating every person they encountered as a potential threat. The friendly senior chief who had introduced himself might be a legitimate ally or a sophisticated adversary gathering intelligence about her capabilities. Her helpful roommate might be an innocent ordnance specialist or someone positioned to monitor and report on her activities. The crisis was no longer approaching. It was here, hidden behind the routine operations of a military facility where thousands of tons of explosive ordnance sat waiting for someone with the knowledge and access to turn America's own weapons against itself. At 0347 hours, Katie was jolted awake by the harsh blare of the facility's general quarters alarm. The piercing sound cut through the pre-dawn darkness like a knife, followed immediately by urgent announcements over the base-wide communication system. Red emergency lighting flooded their quarters as Martinez rolled out of her rack with the practiced efficiency of someone who had responded to numerous emergency drills. General quarters, general quarters. All hands to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Security breach in Sector 7. All personnel report to designated emergency positions immediately. Katie's training kicked in instantly, her mind shifting from sleep to full tactical awareness in seconds. She grabbed her uniform and began dressing with mechanical precision, while Martinez did the same on the other side of the room. Through their small window, Katie could see security vehicles racing across the facility with their emergency lights flashing, while personnel emerged from buildings throughout the complex. Sector 7, Martinez said grimly as she laced her boots. That's where they store the high-explosive ordnance for the carrier battle groups. If someone's trying to get in there. She didn't finish the sentence, but Katie understood the implications. Sector 7 contained enough explosives to level half the base and create a fireball visible from space. They rushed out of their quarters along with dozens of other personnel, all moving toward their assigned emergency stations. Katie's temporary assignment meant she was supposed to report to the main administrative building for accountability and instructions, but her real mission required her to get as close as possible to whatever was happening in Sector 7. Martinez, she called out as they reached the first intersection. I don't know where I'm supposed to go for emergency muster. Can you point me toward the admin building? This way, Martinez replied, leading her down a pathway that took them closer to the facility's central operations area. As they moved, Katie could hear radio chatter from security personnel and the distant sound of what might have been weapons fire. The scene at the facility's emergency operations center was controlled chaos. Senior personnel were coordinating response efforts while security teams received briefings and equipment assignments. Katie positioned herself where she could overhear the tactical communications while maintaining her cover as a confused new arrival seeking instructions. Senior Chief Kowalski appeared at the center of the activity, coordinating security response efforts with the calm professionalism of someone who had planned for exactly this type of emergency. He was speaking rapidly into a secure radio handset while pointing to specific locations on a large facility map displayed on electronic screens. Bravo Team, maintain perimeter security around Sector 6. Charlie Team, establish containment around the breach point. Do not engage unless fired upon. We need these people alive for interrogation. Katie edged closer, straining to hear more details about the situation. What she heard made her blood run cold. Sir, one of the radio operators reported to Kowalski, we have confirmation of at least 4 hostile actors inside the Sector 7 perimeter. They've neutralized the exterior security sensors and appear to be attempting to access Bunker 7 Alpha. That's where we're storing the Mark 48 torpedo warheads for the submarine squadron. The Mark 48 torpedo warheads represented some of the most sophisticated and dangerous ordnance at the facility. In the hands of terrorists or hostile foreign actors, they could be used to devastating effect against civilian or military targets. The fact that the intruders had specifically targeted that bunker suggested detailed knowledge of facility operations and storage locations. How did they get past the exterior security? Kowalski demanded. Unknown at this time, sir. Initial assessment suggests they had detailed knowledge of patrol schedules and sensor placement. This was a well-planned operation with insider intelligence support. Katie felt her stomach tighten as the conversation confirmed her worst fears. The attack wasn't just happening. It had been planned with inside help, and the attackers had already penetrated the facility's most sensitive areas. Lieutenant Commander Jackson appeared at Kowalski's side, his face grim with concern. Senior Chief, we need to consider the possibility that this is a diversion. If they can keep our security forces focused on Sector 7, it might give accomplices access to other areas of the facility. Agreed, Kowalski replied. I want additional security teams deployed to Sectors 4, 5, and 8. Full accountability of all civilian contractors and temporary personnel. Nobody moves anywhere without escort and verification. The mention of accountability for temporary personnel meant Katie's freedom to observe and gather intelligence was about to be severely restricted. She needed to act quickly if she was going to contribute to resolving the crisis instead of being confined to administrative hold with other non-essential personnel. She approached Senior Chief Kowalski directly, abandoning her cover of confused new arrival for the confident bearing of someone with relevant capabilities. Senior Chief Specialist Romano. I have advanced marksmanship training and tactical experience. If you need additional security support, I'm available. Kowalski turned to her with surprise and immediate suspicion. Specialist, you're supposed to report to admin for accountability. This is not a situation for personnel in training status. With respect, Senior Chief, my scores at Fort Meridian suggest I might be more capable than my training status indicates. If there are hostile actors threatening this facility, I'd rather help stop them than sit in a conference room waiting for accountability. Before Kowalski could respond, one of the radio operators called out urgently. Senior Chief, we've lost contact with Charlie team at the Sector 7 perimeter. Last transmission indicated they were taking fire from multiple positions. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Security forces were under attack, the most dangerous ordnance on the base was threatened, and the response was being hampered by the very security protocols designed to protect the facility. Lieutenant Commander Jackson looked at Katie with calculating eyes. Specialist, what exactly was your score on the combat marksmanship course at Fort Meridian? Perfect score, sir. 42 out of 42 hits at distances up to 350 meters. Jackson exchanged a meaningful look with Kowalski. In an emergency situation with limited personnel and an active threat, capabilities mattered more than rank or assignment status. Senior Chief, Jackson said quietly, we're undermanned for this response. If she can shoot like that, we might need her. Kowalski hesitated for a moment, weighing regulations against operational necessity. The sound of additional weapons fire from the direction of Sector 7 made the decision for him. Specialist Romano, you're temporarily assigned to security response operations. Report to Sergeant Davis at the armory for equipment issue. You'll be attached to Delta Team for perimeter security. Do not engage hostiles unless absolutely necessary for protection of personnel or prevention of ordnance theft. As Katie hurried toward the armory, she activated her concealed communication device and sent a brief, encrypted message to Colonel Webb's support team. Crisis active. Multiple hostiles with inside support attempting ordnance theft. Engaging under emergency assignment cover. May need extraction support. At the armory, she was issued body armor, night vision equipment, and an M4A1 carbine with extra ammunition. As she checked the weapon's condition with practiced efficiency, Sergeant Davis watched with professional interest. Specialist, I don't know what your background is, but Senior Chief Kowalski doesn't assign people to active security teams unless he's confident they can handle themselves. Delta Team is moving to establish overwatch positions covering the approaches to Sector 7. Your job is to observe and report, not to play hero. Katie nodded, but privately she knew that observation and reporting might not be sufficient to prevent a catastrophic security breach. As she moved out with Delta Team toward positions overlooking the most dangerous weapons storage areas on the West Coast, she realized that her mission had evolved from reconnaissance to direct action. The crisis had reached its ultimate test, and Katie Romano was about to discover whether her years of training and her carefully maintained cover would be enough to prevent a disaster that could reshape the balance of power in the Pacific. Delta Team moved through the pre-dawn darkness with tactical precision, their night vision equipment turning the facility's landscape into an eerie green-tinted world of shadows and illuminated structures. Katie found herself positioned between Sergeant Davis and Corporal Martinez, a different Martinez than her roommate, this one a veteran security specialist with multiple combat deployments. As they approached their overwatch position overlooking Sector 7, the sound of sporadic gunfire echoed across the facility. "Contact front," came the whispered radio transmission from one of the perimeter teams. Multiple hostiles moving between bunkers 7 Alpha and 7 Bravo. They appear to have breaching equipment and are attempting to access the torpedo warhead storage. Through her night vision scope, Katie could see the tactical situation developing below them. For figures in dark tactical gear were working methodically to breach the reinforced entrance to Bunker 7 Alpha, while 2 additional personnel provided security overwatch from concealed positions. Their movements were professional and coordinated, suggesting military or special operations training rather than common criminal activity. "Delta Team, this is Control," Senior Chief Kowalski's voice crackled through their radio. "You have eyes on the target area. What's your assessment?" Sergeant Davis keyed his radio to respond. "Control Delta. We count 6 hostiles total. 4 working on bunker breach, 2 providing security. They're using professional tactics and appear to have sophisticated equipment. Estimate 15 minutes until they achieve access to the warhead storage." The timeline was critically short. Once the attackers gained access to the torpedo warheads, they could potentially extract the nuclear components or use the conventional explosives to create a devastating blast that would destroy much of the facility and contaminate the surrounding area. "Delta Team, you are authorized to engage if necessary to prevent ordnance theft," came Kowalski's reply. "All other units converging on your position, but you may be the primary response for the next 10 minutes. Katie studied the tactical situation through her scope, her mind automatically calculating distances, wind conditions, and engagement angles. The hostile security personnel were positioned approximately 400 meters away, well within her effective range but requiring precision shots in low-light conditions, while other team members were potentially in the line of fire. "Sergeant," she said quietly to Davis, "I can take the security overwatch positions from here. Clean shots, no risk to friendly forces. That would allow your team to maneuver closer to the breach team." Davis looked at her with surprise and immediate suspicion. "Specialist 400-meter shots in low-light conditions aren't basic training-level marksmanship. What's your actual background?" Before Katie could respond, the tactical situation took a dramatic turn for the worse. One of the hostile security personnel had spotted the muzzle flash from a perimeter team's position and was directing accurate suppressive fire that forced the friendly forces into cover. Simultaneously, the breach team had apparently achieved initial access to the bunker and was beginning to move equipment inside. "Delta Team, this is Control. Perimeter teams are taking heavy fire and cannot advance. You are cleared for immediate engagement to prevent ordnance theft. Authorization comes from Facility Commanding Officer." Katie made a decision that would forever change her carefully constructed cover. She adjusted her position to achieve optimal shooting stance, controlled her breathing to synchronize with her heart rate, and acquired her first target through the rifle scope. The hostile security personnel was approximately 410 meters away, positioned behind cover that exposed only his head and shoulders, firing controlled bursts at friendly positions. Her first shot was perfect. The .223 round struck center mass, and the hostile security personnel dropped immediately. Before his partner could react or identify the source of the shot, Katie had already shifted to her second target. 2 shots, 2 confirmed neutralizations, at distances that should have been impossible for someone with her supposed training level. "Jesus Christ," whispered Corporal Martinez. "Where the hell did that come from?" The elimination of the security overwatch allowed the perimeter teams to advance, but the breach team had already gained access to the bunker and was working to extract warheads. Katie shifted her scope to assess the new tactical situation and realized with growing alarm that the breach team was not trying to steal the warheads. They were positioning what appeared to be explosive charges around the storage area. "Control, this is Delta," Sergeant Davis reported urgently. The hostiles aren't stealing ordnance. They're rigging it for detonation. We're looking at a potential catastrophic explosion that could level half the base. The response from control was immediate and desperate. All units, emergency acceleration. Breach team must be neutralized before they complete explosive placement. Delta team, you are authorized for any action necessary. Katie realized that conventional tactics would not be sufficient to prevent the disaster. The breach team was working inside a reinforced bunker with limited access points, protected by their own explosives and the risk of detonating the very warheads they were trying to destroy. A direct assault would likely trigger exactly the explosion they were trying to prevent. Sergeant Davis, she said, making a decision that would expose her true identity. I need to get closer to that bunker. I have specialized training for this type of situation. Specialist? What kind of specialized training? Davis demanded. Katie looked at him directly, abandoning her cover completely. Naval Special Warfare Training, Sergeant. Maritime interdiction and explosive ordnance disposal. I can neutralize that breach team, but I need to do it alone and I need to do it now. The admission hung in the air between them like a revelation that changed everything. Davis stared at her, processing the implications of what she had just revealed. You're not a basic training recruit, he said slowly. No, Sergeant. I'm not. Before Davis could respond further, Katie was already moving. She stripped off her unnecessary equipment, retaining only her sidearm, knife, and a small explosive charge from her concealed gear. Her approach to the bunker was fluid and silent, using shadows and cover with the practiced efficiency of someone who had infiltrated hostile positions many times before. The breach team had left one person on security at the bunker entrance while 3 others worked inside. Katie neutralized the security personnel with her knife, a quick and silent engagement that left no opportunity for warning the others. Then she was inside the bunker, moving through the darkness with night vision equipment toward the sound of her targets working among the torpedo warheads. What she found inside the bunker confirmed her worst fears and validated her decision to abandon cover. The attackers weren't just planning to detonate the warheads. They were positioning shaped charges designed to breach the warhead casings and create a dirty bomb effect that would contaminate hundreds of square miles with radioactive material. The engagement inside the bunker was brief and decisive. 3 hostiles, working in a confined space, surprised by an opponent with superior training and the advantage of initiative. When it was over, Katie was alone among the torpedo warheads and explosive devices, using her EOD training to carefully disarm charges that could have created the worst radiological disaster in American history. Control, this is Specialist Romano, she reported over the radio, using her real voice and professional bearing for the first time since arriving at the facility. Breach team neutralized. Explosive devices disarmed. Sector 7 is secure. The response from Senior Chief Kowalski was immediate and filled with questions that would require answers she was finally prepared to give. Romano, what is your actual identity and background? That was not the performance of a basic training recruit. Katie emerged from the bunker into the pre-dawn light, where she found Sergeant Davis and the rest of Delta Team waiting with expressions of amazement and confusion. In the distance, she could see Senior Chief Kowalski and Lieutenant Commander Jackson approaching with additional security personnel. Senior Chief, she said as they reached her position. I'm Petty Officer First Class Elena Rodriguez, Naval Special Warfare Command. I was operating under deep cover assignment when this crisis developed. My real qualifications include explosive ordnance disposal and maritime security operations. The truth was finally in the open, and Katie realized that her carefully constructed cover identity had served its purpose by placing her in exactly the right position to prevent a catastrophic attack on American naval capabilities. But she also knew that the revelation would trigger questions and investigations that would reshape not just her mission, but potentially the entire security structure of critical military installations throughout the Pacific Fleet. 6 hours after the crisis at Sector 7, Katie found herself seated in the facility's secure conference room facing a tribunal that would determine not only her immediate fate, but potentially the future of her naval career. The room was sterile and windowless, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lighting that cast sharp shadows across the polished conference table. Present were Senior Chief Kowalski, Lieutenant Commander Jackson, Colonel Webb, who had arrived via emergency helicopter transport, and Captain Rebecca Sterling, the commanding officer of Naval Weapons Station Seal Beach. Captain Sterling was a compact woman in her early 50s with the weathered bearing of someone who had commanded ships in hostile waters before transitioning to shore-based critical infrastructure commands. Her steel-gray eyes missed nothing as she reviewed the classified briefing materials that Colonel Webb had provided, occasionally glancing up to study Katie with the calculating assessment of someone evaluating both threat and opportunity. 3 months ago, she had been Specialist Romano, the quiet recruit who polished her rifle too carefully and endured condescending treatment from instructors who couldn't see past their own assumptions. Today, she was Petty Officer Rodriguez, a naval special warfare operator whose skills had prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack and earned the respect of senior commanders throughout the Pacific Fleet. The transformation wasn't just personal. It represented a broader recognition that the military's greatest strength lay not in rigid hierarchy and traditional assumptions, but in the diverse capabilities and hidden talents of the people who chose to serve their country in whatever capacity they could contribute most effectively. As Katie prepared to begin her new assignment with the Installation Security Assessment Program, she knew that there would be other facilities, other threats, and other opportunities to serve. But she also knew that she would never again have to hide her capabilities or accept being underestimated by those who couldn't see beyond their narrow expectations. The desert sun was setting over Naval Weapons Station Seal Beach, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. In the distance, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward horizons where new challenges and opportunities awaited. Katie stood at attention one final time as Captain Sterling dismissed the briefing, then stepped forward into a future where her true capabilities would finally be recognized and utilized in service of the nation she had sworn to defend. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.